Today's podcast is brought to you by Eddie. Find better candidates, conduct more focused interviews, and make data-driven hiring decisions. Hire Eddie, hire faster, hire smarter, hire more. Learn more at eddie.com. Now, let's podcast. Welcome to Disrupt Salt Lake City. My name is Jared Olson, and I am joined today by Christine Zorick, the head of HR with 4Foods Group and a former Disrupt HR SLC presenter. And I'm also joined by Rob Lifforth. Rob is a legend in the local HR community, and he's already saying, oh my gosh, but he's been in so many tech companies, and whenever you want to know who is who, Rob is right next to him. Rob is the man and a super entrepreneur in the world of HR. And we're really excited to talk today about the role HR plays in mergers and acquisitions, and these guys are crazy experts. So, Christine, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing at 4Foods Group, your experience with M&As, and then Rob will kick it over to you.
Thanks, Jared. Rob, pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. You as well.
So, what 4Foods Group is doing in the restaurant industry is totally unique. You probably saw us in Franchise Times, and that speaks to the heart and soul of what FFG is. So we have built a scalable model that we're able to replicate. It's totally iterative, and we're going after a sweet spot kind of in the food and beverage industry with unique founders that are still at the 2 to 5 store level and don't have the ability to scale on their own. What 4Foods Group brings a unique model that is totally efficient, where expert support remains at the restaurant support center, and we essentially let the founders focus on what they do best, which is their food and people, and we take everything else.
Cool. What are some of the restaurants that you guys are acquiring right now?
So right now, and just through the course of 2017, 2018, we acquired 48 Little Caesar stores in the southeastern market, but more notably Swig is one, also Mobetta's Hawaiian style, and R&R Barbecue was our first major acquisition. Before that, we were franchising Kneaders Cafe and Bakery.
That's awesome. That's how it all started, awesome. Right? Yeah. Andrew had a Kneaders and said, I can do this bigger and better, and started 4Foods Group and started acquiring all sorts of companies.
That's right.
Cool. So how long have you been with the company for?
About a year and a half. I'll hit my 2-year mark February of 2019.
Awesome.
So it's been an awesome ride.
Very cool. Rob?
Yeah. So I've been in the tech startup world for a long time. I started out with Fusionio was kind of the first big one that people know about. I was with a guy by the name of Dennis Wood, I think we all know, and we started the HR department there, and we wrote. I was with them from that all the way up through IPO and until we were acquired in 2014 by SanDisk.
How much was that acquisition for?
The acquisition was for, I think it was 1.6 total was the acquisition. We had a bunch of money in the bank that I think they reported at 1.3 because of the money in the bank. So
was that the biggest acquisition in Utah history at that time?
I don't know the answer to that. Huh. I'll say yes.
Okay.
I have no idea. No, I don't. I don't think the answer is yes. So I think probably Novell holds that would hold that, but I could be wrong. So
okay, now Qualtrics is making us all look bad.
Oh heavens! Do you see that?
$8 billion.
I'm so happy for them.
Yeah.
So happy for them.
Yeah, that's really cool. So let's talk a little bit about this. For those in our audience who are listening and wondering what M&As are, it's mergers and acquisitions, right? And a question for you guys. What role does human resources play in the M&A process?
I think it's so traditionally, if you look back from a historic standpoint, I mean, a lot of times we were brought in on the back end to like assimilate, the acquired company into the new company, and it was a totally broken program. Oh, the system was so broken, where you would go and spend. I mean, I went through several that were like over $100 million. And the first one they brought was a $100 million acquisition, and they brought us in right at the tail end, and they said, okay, great, we spent all this money, bring him in, and it was terrible because they didn't look at the culture of the previous company. They didn't even give it a thought into acquisition and how you would assimilate them. They didn't wrap up any of the talent, and ultimately they got I remember my CEO explained it a year and a half later. He's like, we have $100 million paperweight. It was an absolute disaster because they didn't think about it, right? They didn't think about it. And so the thing that I love about where HR is going, and they have more, you're having a seat at the table, you have more influence. You need to be looking at these things from the get-go as soon as you're looking at financials, right? Because if you don't, then you're going to get, whatever you're paying for that acquisition cost, it could just fall flat on its face. And the thing that CEOs are starting to wake up to, when you have those kinds of failures, I mean, it really puts their jobs at risk, and it puts the company's financials at risk. And so M&As are very, very risky propositions on both sides, right? And so we need to be looking at it at a broader scope.
Yeah, and they don't need to be risky. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done pre-acquisition during that due diligence process, where right now it's all financials. But financials are only reporting on what has happened. And what HR does, working with the people are the leading indicators, producing those lagging indicators. The people are actually producing those outputs. And so we need to be measuring productivity. We need to be looking at the culture, the talent, all of that way ahead of time, so you can design a plan on how to essentially merge those two cultures together. It was interesting because when I was talking to Josh and Andrew before I actually signed on with 4 Foods Group, I knew they were big into M&A. That was their strategy and direction for growth. So I spent time interviewing a lot of employees individually that had recently gone through M&As and tried to find out from just that individual level, what did you like about it? What did you hate about it? And the pain point for all of them was that they became a line item. They became this line on the spreadsheet and were totally forgotten about, where their prior company knew them and could work with them on a personal basis, and that was completely lost. And so that's one of the things that at 4 Foods Group we're really focusing on, is that when we bring these new restaurant groups into the fold, essentially, is that every employee maintains their individuality and that they're recognized as a person and they don't lose that.
Okay, so let's explore this for a second. As an employee, if I was going to be part of an M&A, my question would be, 1, do I get a payout? If so, how much is it? And 2, am I going to lose a job? And 3, what's this new company structure look like? Who do I report to? What's the culture? So as you talk to these employees, Christine, and get their feedback, how earlier on in this process, as we've talked about, can HR step in and answer the majority of those questions that employees have? Can we do it earlier in the process, or is it just bringing recognition to it so when the M&A finalizes that's when we can communicate it? Like, how do we get that information to employees?
Well, that's a great question. I believe it's a 2-part answer. So for the employees, the companies have to be very careful about when they release that information, right? The due diligence has to be done. Paperwork has to be signed, so it's not leaked in case the deal falls through. However, that being said, there's so much work that needs to be done way before that ever happens and designed in, and that's kind of what I was speaking to. And Rob, you see this, you've seen this firsthand, and that's where HR hasn't been yet, but that's certainly where it's going. We have to get in to partner with the finance teams during the due diligence process, and the people have to be part of that. They just can't be left out anymore, because at the end of the day, we know M&As fail because of the culture. And what is the purpose for that acquisition? It was to, 1, essentially gain market share or generate more revenue. Well, if you're losing that through the failed acquisition, it's a wash. You're coming out neutral when really you're not neutral, because all of the lost opportunity costs you could have spent growing the business in other ways. Yeah,
not to mention the loss in value, whatever you spend on this thing. The thing that's interesting to me is you go through this. For a lot of people who haven't been on part of an M&A, so like to your point earlier, is that M&As are scary, right? For all the reasons you just talked about. Am I going to have a job? Am I going to, where do I play in all this? I was really important before, especially as you start looking at founders and owners or key talent that you want to acquire. Even the key talent, they might be very, very important, very, very bright, but they've never gone through an M&A, and it's a very scary thing. And so you got to be careful as to when they find out, when companies find out, especially if you're dealing with public companies, because of the regulation that comes with that. But the second thing is you have to figure out before you go in there, we have to do a better job of assessing the talent that's in there, assessing the culture, and understanding what kind of culture they have, so you can figure out a plan as how to bring them in. Or be very, if we're going to be candid and be very callous about it, or don't, right? Sometimes the answer is we want their technology or we want them out of the marketplace, and so be very deliberate about we don't want this talent in.
We're buying you for your IP, and that's it.
Yep. It happens all the time. Like, people don't like to say that because guess what? It's not popular, but that's what happens.
Okay, so explain what's the process in M&A? So we talked about getting involved earlier on. At what point? And are there stages in the process? I'm a noob to all this. I haven't done an M&A in the past. So how does that work? When ideally would HR be involved, and when would we start talking about the people operations side of it?
Well, I think this is where HR has the opportunity to really partner with venture capital firms to become part of that due diligence process, or whatever third-party entity they're using for that, being a key player through that. So yes, there are lots of different stages. They first are just looking at financials to see, if this is really where the company wants to go. Then they sign a letter of intent, and I would say it's probably after that letter of intent signing, but before the PSA is signed, where HR really needs to become a key player in that process.
Yeah, so I have done another major acquisition that was another $100 million deal, and we were brought in just as you described it, and it was night and day difference. There was some things there's some extenuating circumstances that helped out in that too, but one of them being is the company that we acquired was sitting on top of a PEO by Trina, and they had everything really buttoned up, right? Which that in and of itself was helpful, but what it really was indicative to me was said that the founders looked at their people differently, right? They wanted to make sure that they had all the benefits and all the things that are important to people and valued them as a company. And I'm not saying that you can't find one without a PEO in place. It was helpful in this particular deal. But they brought us in HR in a lot earlier, as you described it, and what it did is it made that M&A, as we went through on the other side, once we signed PSA and we went in and we had a relationship with the old founders that we had locked up for several years, and it ultimately made a very, very successful acquisition. They were assimilated into the company great. It helped the company grow. After we were acquired by SanDisk, they actually spun that company out and resold it, and so it made the company a ton of money by doing it way. So it's one of those things where you can take HR and put a solid ROI on top of it.
Okay, how do you work with the other HR team, if there is one, right? Do HR get together from both companies and start talking early on about who's going to do what roles? So I guess that's question number one. How do you talk together? And then two, is there usually a lead company that takes over and says, we're the parent company, so we want our values and mission statement, and these are the things we want to keep? And how does the junior company come back and combat and fight for those things that they really want?
Go ahead.
Okay. So that's a very insightful question. So it's always going to be the company with majority stake who assumes policies, procedures, protocols, standards, all of that. But
so you just hope you're the senior company with majority stake, and you can go in and say, "Hey, here's what we're doing." Otherwise, you're kind of at the mercy of whoever the other team is.
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay. But what we've done at 4 Foods Group with our HR department is we're very clear on what our mission is, and that is 100% compliance. through proactive prevention to drive sustainable value to the bottom line. And we repeat it kind of incessantly, but and how we've structured our partnership kind of with the minority, company is that they understand now that with their HR department, they are stewards of FFG and our mission, vision, and values. And that means policies, procedures, and standards. And so they are the steward, they learn, and we assimilate them into our culture, and then they help deliver that culture and sustain it and grow it at their individual level. And so we're building out models right now, but as we churn more acquisitions through, once this new entity reaches a certain number of employees, then we will embed a dedicated HR person onto that team. But what my team will provide to them is like an implementation manual. And it will list everything, have our offer letter templates, job description templates, the employee handbook, everything. So they're well versed in how we run everything from A to Z, payroll, compliance, everything, and then they are just the steward of that.
So how do you do that in a way that doesn't make them feel like, man, I have no say in this. I can't even design my own job offers and so forth. Like, how do you keep them empowered instead of making them just feel like they're only a steward?
And that's a great question, because I've been working through our HR supervisor with this just right now at our Little Caesars brand in Alabama, and that was her question. But each organization is unique, and it's unique to the founders that started it. And so even though, they are part of 4 Foods Group, the Little Caesars demographic, the clientele that they're serving is very unique. And so she has to tailor our policies and procedures to that group, to those employees, to those managers. They operate totally different than Mobetta's does or R&R does. And so she knows that she has to get strategic, and she is a business partner to their division president and to all of their district managers to sustain the FFG culture, but tailor it to their needs there.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's about you have to empower them. As you bring them on, you're going to want to help them buy into your culture, and then give them empower to tweak as needed, right? Because again, you look at as the acquiring company the way to look at it, it's their own individual. It's like another human. Like they just have their own attributes. They have their own way. They have their own lingo. Like everything about them is unique. As you and I are different, right? And so you just have to appreciate them for who they are, but say, hey, help them along the way. Say, hey, come on in. And the reality of it is, I've been on both sides of this, right? So I've acquired lots and lots, and I've been acquired, and sometimes the role's not there, right? When we were acquired by SanDisk, our whole team and our finances whole team, because of the redundancies, was wiped out. Yeah. And they shook our hand and gave us a high five, and now we went. And it worked on, and guess what? We all went and found new jobs. It was great.
So what's the best way to do that? If you're part of an M&A, you have to do layoffs. What advice would you give to HR to most effectively and kindly, to make the blow not so painful? How do you do layoffs?
Each transaction is different. It's similar to anything that you would use on any other termination. Make sure that you are recognizing the dignity of this person. That's super important, right? At the end of the day, and understand that they're not going to be happy about this. They put their heart, sweat, and tears into this project, and the project's going to succeed. And they're not going to, it's tough being told, hey, thanks for all you've done. You're not part of this anymore. And that's a tough, that's a tough thing to deal with from their standpoint. So treat them with dignity. Please, for the love of Pete, bake in a soft landing for them, i.e. a solid severance agreement. If the acquiring company is going to acquire, that has to be part of the package. They have to have a soft landing so they can go find another job. Yeah.
So you don't hire George Clooney and Andrew Kendrick up in there and have them come in and fire everybody for you?
I haven't seen it, so.
No, the previous organization I was at, it wasn't through M&A, but just certain things happened and we had to go through 2 layoffs. And so I helped navigate the organization, through those rifts, and it's tough. The second one, the COO, the CFO, and I stood up in front of the employees for 6 hours, and we told them we would be there as long as we needed to be to answer all of their questions. In some cases, you have to do something like that so you can maintain some type of trust. But I think with M&As, providing that soft landing, and I love that you said dignity, because that's my word here. We leave them with their dignity, and they still feel individual value when they leave. But also you have to rip that Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
I've seen, with acquisitions trying to do a soft transition, and it does not work.
Yeah.
You just rip that Band-Aid and let them land softly with that severance package.
Good advice. So separations are never easy. What are some of the other more difficult things that HR does in the M&A process?
If it's a younger company, and this is probably true for all of them, but it's particularly true with the younger companies where they won't have their processes, airtight, right? And so you have to go in, and so if you go in and there's just one HR person, and it's probably someone that's a little bit not as senior, and so you're gonna have to tell them a little bit that their baby's ugly. Like, hey, it's not a nice way to say it, but it's true. Like, hey, there's some exposure because you're doing it this way. Like, I've ran into that several times. We can't do it anyway because there's too much exposure to the company, or you're not doing it airtight, right? So be nice to them, right, and help them understand that there's a different way of doing it. But to the point earlier that, hey, the acquiring company sets all the rules. I mean, you don't want to go in and act like a tyrant for sure, but you have to help them understand that there's going to be a different way of doing things in town, and it is very uncomfortable. And it happens. It's easy when it's in our department, right? But pay attention, because it'll happen in every single department. It'll happen in your marketing department. It'll happen in your finance department. Finance department in particular will go through probably, in my opinion, the most struggles, because you're assimilating different ERPs and a different way that they're accounting for your money, and it is that is where a lot of strife will happen.
Okay, another question. What financial data, or what data in general, should HR bring to the table? I mean, I'm assuming the EBITDA is kind of king during this process. How can HR be more strategic by going in, and what data does the finance team and the C-suite want to see in making decisions about who to keep, why to keep them, and so forth?
That's a great question. And when you were first asking that, my mind went directly to turnover, because turnover is linked to profitability. Turnover essentially is a productivity measure, and that ties directly over to profitability. So as a CEO, I would want to understand what that workforce's turnover and retention numbers are. But then also for that key talent, I really think you have to pull your stakeholders together within the organization and review. We do that with our M&A team. Once it gets to the point where they've signed that letter of intent and we are seriously looking, then they throw the leadership team up on the board for the company that we may be getting into bed with, and we talk about every single leader within that organization and what the gotchas are, why we might not want to keep them, why we may, and then as the key stakeholders at FFG, we decide that. But it's very one-on-one.
So is that a forced rank system? Is it a quartiling? Like, how do you assess whether to keep or not keep those key managers?
It's been very organic to this point, so we don't necessarily have a system yet. Could I see us getting there as we start to churn more through? Yes, but so far it's just organic.
That's the challenge with acquisitions, and what makes them fun though is that every acquisition is different, right? Yeah. Because the necessity of every acquisition is different. You might be doing it for IP, to acquire certain IP. You might be doing it for market share. You might be doing it just to get your competitor off the table, right? I mean, and so those conversations are going to be different every time. What I would say in addition to that is be very deliberate about locking in the talent that you want to keep, that you want to bring over, and understand that probably the biggest mistake that I've seen time and time again is that on the acquiring side, you'll see companies that say, well, we'll just give them a bunch of equity and that will lock them in, because who's going to walk away from that? And it's a complete fallacy, because one, they haven't bought it, so they don't necessarily value your equity the way that you do, because you're a brand new company to them. And two, a lot of these key talents are getting a major payoff, right? Because they had equity in the old position. And so their life circumstances, because of this transaction, are going to change drastically. So if you want them tied in, put it as part of the deal. Give them serious golden handcuffs in a contractual statement, rather than an implied statement just through equity.
Okay, so we're talking about key talent. What about not key talent? Do you guys even discuss them in the process, or does that come down the road?
Well, with us, because we're food and beverage, we consider that rank and file employees. Yeah, they're coming along with the deal. I mean, there's no reason, unless there was some serious misgivings that the company just didn't take care of, there's no reason to bring them over, because they're the ones that are the bread and butter that are doing the work. So
yeah, it seems to go down to a certain level, and then you just give it as a given that they will or won't come over. The thing to understand is, you look at talent, just by the nature of acquisitions, it always seems to have, you'll have whatever they're tracking to, the acquired company is tracking to from a turnover standpoint, it will take a jump at the acquisition. It's just a natural thing that happens. Okay. And so just keep an eye on that, and don't count on that number, because it won't be true.
Okay. What about an HR professional or an HR team that are viewed more as HR administrators and not strategic business partners? And how do they get a voice during this process when it's kind of too late and their C-suite's not coming to them, but they want to express some concerns and be involved? What advice would you give to them?
Oh, it's tough. It's tough. If they're coming in too late, I mean, the damage is, a lot of the damage is done. And so it's too bad that their C-suite is putting a lot of money and a lot of livelihoods at risk. And so it's too bad that they're at that point. But to answer your question, their biggest challenge, if they want, it's actually a pretty golden opportunity for them to show some strategic initiative within their HR department, is work like heck to get them assimilated through the culture, because that'll be the driver on whether they're successful or not.
Well, and I think too many HR professionals put themselves in that box, that they are HR admin. So you're going to be viewed the way you view yourself, and they have to find ways to reach out, whether it's getting in front of the CEO with a turnover report, or I'm helping our HR supervisor in the Little Caesars group right now, because she and I were sitting side by side last Monday when I was visiting, and she was showing me some great things and letting me know she didn't think two of our district managers are the right people in the right seat on the right bus. They're with the right group, but they just need to be moved around, right? Move the chess pieces. So I asked her if she had spoken to the division president about it, and she said, well, no, can I? I said, absolutely. That's exactly what you're meant to do. I said, you are seeing the leading indicators. You're seeing what's happening in real time. Don't wait for it to hit the financials for them to make a call. You can raise the alarm now. And so HR professionals just generally need to reach out better and more, and they need to legitimize themselves in their vernacular and their reports that they're producing. They can't sit back.
I like that advice. You step up, and if you're not willing to step up, then you're going to be left behind, and there's really not you can do about it. You could quit after the acquisition's done and go find a job where you can be another admin. But if you really want to be strategic, you have to get up and play.
It won't matter if they quit and go find another job. At the end of the day, the difference between a strategic HR person and someone that's just doing an administrative function is their ability to be reactive versus proactive. Yeah. I mean, that at the end of the day, that's what it is, right? So it's jumping up and raising your hand, as you said, as very astutely said. Don't wait till it hits the financials, because then, I mean, great.
It's too late.
Everyone's a Monday morning quarterback. Like, that's awesome, super easy. But like, if you can see that beforehand, then you got yourself something valuable, and people will see that too.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay, I want to talk about culture. I think that this is a huge opportunity to really align cultures and to figure out. So a lot of CEOs wake up and they hate their company and what it's become because they lost their culture. What an awesome opportunity to lose what you love during the M&A process. And that's what human resources can do, right? HR is a social experience for those employees that come in, and we help that social experience improve. That's called culture. So how can we help improve cultures during M&A?
If the first step is, if you haven't done it, define it. Like, if you haven't defined your culture, like, a lot of times I've talked to a lot of earlier startups who will say, "Well, we love it here. We got a great culture." I'll say, "Great, explain it to me." Well, it just feels nice to come to, and that's not wrong per se, but at some point, if you don't define it, it will be defined without your help.
Yep.
And so go define it, and don't, I've had people say, "Well, we don't want it to be just letters on a wall." I'm like, well, that's on you. Like, don't let it be just, words on a wall. You have to define it, and then you have to live everything to it. That means you have to hire to culture. You have to fire to culture. You have to promote to culture. You have to discipline towards culture, right? Everything needs to be defined in it. And I would even exchange the words culture and really talk. I've read a great article by the Pluralsight founder,
Aaron Skonnard.
He talked about how it's not culture, it's actually just talking about your values. If you go after culture, then you get kind of a what's the word? Like, you get a whole bunch of me, and me guys, right? Me too guys, right? Where they're just saying, yeah, they're all the same like-minded thought process. That's exactly opposite of what you want. You're looking for diversity in thought, but they have to have core values, and that's really what you're going after.
Christine, what's a better way to assess culture in the process?
A better way. Well, one, you have to know it. But then, two, how are the employees responding to that? And you can look at that through engagement. I think in financial terms, we talk about that in productivity. How productive are the employees actually? Because that's going to show you how they're responding to your culture. Because you may have your values, you may say them, but if you're not living them, the employees are going to come in doing a half-hearted job. And I think also you need to make sure that your leaders, your department heads, are embracing those values and really truly leading their departments. Because just because someone has the manager title or management experience does not mean that they're a good leader. And I think CEOs need to really tighten up on understanding the leaders that they have in their organization, and what are the turnover numbers within each department, because turnover is a direct indicator to a good or bad leader. People quit their bosses, right, not the company. And so even though a CEO may think he has a strong manager in a position or really likes that department head, if turnover is high in that department, I would be taking a second look at that.
Okay, so let's just say we're the acquiring company, and we go in, there's no HR team, or an HR team that's been really ineffective. They don't have a lot of data about turnover, employee net promoter scores, and you don't know what kind of talent you're acquiring. How do you go in quickly and assess that? Do you do surveys? Do you do net promoter scores? Like, what's the way to go in and figure out the pulse of the company you're acquiring?
I think, you have to set a base somewhere. I mean, if you need to start measuring it somewhere and it's a good way to get to introduce the company that's being acquired into how you guys do business, right? And so you go start putting that in, and hopefully have the process that are already there. But, and the thing that's interesting, most of these, I shouldn't say, unless on the bigger deals they might have some of that information, but most deals don't, right? Like, it's been more often than not have I not had the information, so you've got to go in quick and figure it out. And a lot of the quickest way that I've done it is skip level interviews, direct, sit down and just chat people up in the interview. On the last major deal that I did, I spent several weeks out there, and I took 2 or 3 people to lunch or breakfast. I ate out a lot that time. Just because you just want to hear them and hear What are they worried about? What you really are trying to establish that baseline somewhere all along the way, so you can start making actionable items after that.
So are these rank and file employees, or are these key leaders?
I will take anyone, all from the top to the bottom, and I will spend you're going to naturally spend plenty of time with key leaders. I go out of my way to spend as much time as I can with a rank and file, because frankly, those are the guys that are running the business day to day, and they're going to know where the flaws are.
Yep.
Because they get hidden.
Right, and they're talking about those flaws amongst themselves, but if the company doesn't have a good suggestion type structure where the employees can communicate up, it's gonna get lost, and they're not gonna take that up. But they're certainly talking about it amongst themselves. So I think also too, and this is something before the podcast started, I mentioned that I'm working on just on the side, is really developing a unique team that could go into these M&A deals, partnering with VC firms to essentially seed the company being acquired to get in. If they don't have those numbers and those reports, you could spend 5 days, interview those people, work alongside them, and it would tell all, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know how accurate that is? Are they just trying to say what the new company wants to hear to save their job?
They wouldn't know that it's under review at that point. So,
you go in as a consultant or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't know.
And I mean, the way you look at it is, it's just like an astute interviewer, like a astute recruiter that's like, is you're recruiting for a job and you're really, really good at your job, and they'll hear the small cues that are indicative of a problem child, right? Or indicative of a major issue. And so you'll know when to dive in on that kind of stuff.
Okay, cool. What about an HR professional who's going through their first one and just needs some guidance? Where would you recommend that they turn to, other than both of you, and pick your guys' brains and take you to lunch, give you some more food? What would you recommend that they do to learn more to help them through the process?
Actually, I mean, it doesn't need to be us. There's lots of people. That's what I did. The first thing I did when I went through my first M&A thing is I got on the horn with my mentor and be like, dude, how do I do this? And because I was really, really nervous, right? And they helped me out, and that was a great way to do it. They have we all took an M&A class in college, and it was wrong. I mean, it was because every deal is every deal's so unique and different that you just have to. I mean, that's how I learned. I mean, you can read on the internet, but that's how I learned.
Yeah, and that's what I did too, is just reaching out to people that were experts in it, right? That knew way more than I did. So I follow Catherine Besant. She's the CIO, CTO for Bank of America. And in one of her talks on YouTube that I was watching, she mentioned that she has a sister that's an M&A guru. So I found her sister on LinkedIn and hit her up, and we had a phone call, and I got some really great information.
I love that.
But I think a lot more needs to happen for HR professionals with M&A. There's just not a lot of knowledge out there, so I'm working on some articles and things, just because I think that's a missing knowledge center for HR professionals, because it's been so heavily geared towards finance, but that, it's starting to change. So
cool. So this podcast, Disrupt SLC, attracts people that are entrepreneurial. Take the three of us. We all have multiple things that we're doing, multiple side hustles, and so we're going to have a lot of people like that are listening. What advice would you give to a fellow disruptor who would like to facilitate an introduction of two companies? How could they go in and put those people together, whether it's their own company and they want to be acquired, or whether they are consulting with a company and they say, this is a good fit for this organization? How can they go and align those people together?
For me, it starts months, years before that, right? There has to be... I love introducing people to other organizations, right? And I just love... Yeah, I do. I love to connect people. And the reason why is... And 9 times out of the 10, I have no personal gain other than the warm fuzzies it gives me, right? But that's enough. That's enough in and of itself. Because a lot of times, and as you do that, people will start to know you as somebody that's in the know, that can connect people, and they always know some deal that's happening, right? And sometimes the deal works out, sometimes it doesn't, right? But if nothing else, the network's there, and it has to be genuine, not just to make your network bigger. Like there's nothing more worthless in the whole world than a large network that is superficial.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a lot of wasted energy. Like know that you're doing it with their best interest at heart, with no necessarily personal or financial gain on your own term. And if you do that and you start to get a the other stuff will follow. It typically does, right? It's the class. Call it what it is. Call it the golden rule. Call it karma. All those things kind of follow that same mantra. But if you do that, that's really where magic happens.
Yeah. So totally agree. I think too, it's having a peripheral vision of what's going on around you, so you can key into those opportunities. To connect people, to link things, and it's just keeping an open perspective, and kind of thirsting for that ability to be able to see beyond just yourself or your industry.
That's great. A piece of advice I would offer, as Rob's talking about being a connector, one of the people I've tried to grow in my network are local VCs. And so I'm not afraid to hit them up and just say, hey, I'm Jared, let's go to lunch. I don't have a company for sale, and I don't know who you should buy, but I want to be in your network and get to know what you're doing. And so if you do want to connect, a great place to start is with those angel investors and VCs and other companies that are being acquired or going through the acquisition. I mean, I can't imagine who wouldn't love to pick Ryan Smith at Qualtrics's brain right now about how he went from IPO to acquisition in a matter of a day. So it'd be kind of interesting stuff. Final words of advice you guys have just about M&As or anything else that you'd like for us to be aware of?
Pay attention to the culture of the company. It's you're going to spend a lot of money on whatever you're going to buy, and this advice is for as much the non-HR professionals as it is for the HR professionals. You're going to spend a lot of money on this. Your financials may or may not break it. Your culture definitely will break it. That is, I can definitively say, if you don't pay attention to it, it will fall apart in front of your face, and you'll be sitting there scratching your head. So pay attention to it up front.
Same. If you do not give the time and attention and the resources that you need to that culture, and really focusing on how you're going to assimilate those cultures, it will fail. I mean, you can go out and read the plethora of Harvard Business Review articles on it, and you don't want a marginalized culture, you want an assimilated culture. And so you have to put a plan in place. It's active involvement, active participation, and actually active resources and throwing some money at that so it is successful. If you don't want to throw money at it, then you're going to throw your money out the window.
Yeah.
Christine, Rob, thank you guys so very much for your time and for disrupting the HR community in Utah. You guys are awesome.
Okay,
Thank you, Jared.